it's just something that is really fundamental to the culture of LCSC, and something that sounds like it's been really productive and interesting as well. So we are going to record this, and I did click on the recording, so we should be good to go. And Heather, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you and Christina.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Okay, thank you. So I think I know everybody on the call, but I'll go ahead and introduce myself anyways, and then I'll give Christina a chance to introduce herself as well. So I'm Heather Van Mullem. I teach in the Movement and Sports Sciences Division. I was so very fortunate this semester that Christina, who I'll let introduce herself in just a second, agreed to embark on this project with me. And I can share that she's agreed to continue on next fall, which is super awesome, especially since I'm not paying her, which means I need to figure out some way to compensate her for her time, effort, and energy that doesn't require straight up cash. So I'm still working on that one. But Christina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Christina Poole. I'm probably in my third year at LCSC, but I've been in college for about 8 total now. I keep changing my major. I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. So I was in the military for 6 years. And when I got out, I thought I really wanted to be a nurse. And I did nursing for a while. And I learned that Heather actually came down to CWI a couple years ago. And I got to meet her then. And she was just really inspirational then. And I learned that it wasn't nursing that I wanted to be in and was passionate about. It was actually helping people overall. And so I changed my major and I want to go on to graduate school and become a physical therapist. And I know the biggest thing lately is COVID. It's everywhere we go. It's everything we learn and talk about. And I think the problem is it's creating such a disparity between professionals and students. And so when Heather approached me with this project, I was really excited because I love doing research. I love learning more. And I just thought it was going to be a really cool project for us to do together. And we work really well together.
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, we do work really well together. So a little backstory. Christina has actually taken the class that she has been helping me with before. So she took it from me last spring, right? And in fact, was part of the COVID transition, right? From face-to-face to online. And so had the opportunity to not only have exposure to the content already and negotiate the class, but then also to see what it was like as we made this transition. So she had a pretty deep appreciation and understanding of some of the challenges we've been faced with as faculty as we tried to negotiate this changing environment in which we're teaching. And so one of the things I've been focused on a lot lately, especially as I step back from being chair, was trying to think differently about how I'm doing what I'm doing, right? How I'm teaching and how I'm engaging students and trying to think about how to do a better job. And in the process of sort of this self-exploration, I had the privilege to talk with some faculty who are engaged in this work on their respective campuses. And I'll talk a little bit more about a couple of campuses that seem to be doing this really, really well because it's foundationally built into what it is and how they function. And in our conversations, we were talking about some of the unique challenges we're faced as we're trying to think about how to do our jobs the best we can to best serve our students. And one of the things that kept coming up in conversation was that we seem to be pushed and pulled into this more of a consumer-driven model of thinking about education, that we're providing it as a product, and that if we provide it as a product, there are some inherent challenges and problems with that approach. And in fact, it might actually encourage people to be more passive in the learning environment rather than more actively engaged. And so they were sharing with me some of the work that they've done and that their institution has done to try to break apart this hierarchy that's been created in this model that we seem to be navigating towards. And it's really, really intentional, but it's collaborative, which I love, and which I think really speaks to a place like LC, where we sort of thrive on the opportunity to be collaborative, whether it's with colleagues or with students, whether it's working on projects that are research-based or not, right? We try to simulate and create these experiences. So this work that they've been doing is really thinking about using and relying upon students to provide their unique perspectives, to be partners with us in our own pedagogy. And then if we try that, what would that look like and how might that impact the work that it is we do? And the thing I love particularly about this is that it's process oriented. While we hope that the outcomes will move us further away from this other consumer driven model and back towards embracing the opportunity to be collaborative and to be interactive and engaged, it's not the focus. The focus is the process and what that looks like. And it could change, and it should change based upon the instructor, based upon the student that's engaged in this work, and based upon the class itself. So at its core, this idea of faculty-student collaborative pedagogy is based on 3 principles: respect, reciprocity, and a shared responsibility in learning. The idea behind this, and Christina and I will talk about this in terms of what our experience has been like so far, is not that it's not that the hierarchy is there and I'm the faculty and she's a student. It's that we're coming at this together. We're both thinking about strategizing, talking, discussing what are ways we can improve what this experience is like for the students in class at this time. She brings a perspective that I simply don't have. And her perspective is invaluable to helping me better understand how I can be the most effective instructor I can be. But I can't get there without her. And this is very different than an SCE, right? An SCE is what happens at the end. Sometimes people fill them out, sometimes they don't, sometimes they read the questions, sometimes that's not what this is. This is very much opportunities, purposeful, intentional opportunities where she and I sit down side by side and talk about how things are going and what different perspectives we each bring to the table to think differently about how we're doing this work. So that's a little rationale behind the idea behind these types of projects, and gives you some kind of an idea of what it is we're trying to accomplish. Christina, would you like to add anything?
So just based on the principles that we have set in motion, really it comes down to respect, setting those clear expectations and allowing for consistency between professionals and students. There's such a big gap when you have a lot of these fresh kids from high school. I myself am 37, so I'm not as new to this as some of them, but even at an older age, there's a clear definitive line of respect that you give professionals. It's not just here, I sign your paycheck. It's I've spent all this time and learning into giving you a better education. And then it allows for the mutual benefit. The shared responsibility in learning is you get to learn about other people and in hopes that it will help you become a better professional. So I think that's really all I had to add to that, Heather.
Thanks. So there's a lot on this slide, and essentially let me try to make sense of what this means. So trying to figure out how to be a better instructor has led me back and forth between, what are the best, the research informed practices? What is the research saying? What is it telling us? What is it illustrating that these are the things that we need to try to create and simulate in our classrooms? And pretty much, these are the primary things that keep coming up. We've talked about these things in the CTL and how different ways we can try to improve upon or build upon the work that we're doing here to try to ensure that these are integral pieces to what it is that we do. And this practice of a student-faculty partnership incorporates all of these best practices. And the other piece to this, right? We've spent a lot of time talking about high impact practices and what does that look like and how do we incorporate them into the work that we're doing. And I would argue that LC does a really great job of trying to be very purposeful and intentional of using high impact practices because we know they're effective. We know they work, and the students tell us that they are also enjoying participating in them. So this project or this type of work is also considered a high impact practice because it's centered around these 4 primary components. It absolutely is about student engagement. This wouldn't work if Christina wasn't willing to engage, to be honest with me, to, call me out on things when she sees them, right? Like one of the things I love most about this is she's like, well, that's not really what I saw. Let me tell you what I saw. And I have loved that because sometimes that's exactly the kind of feedback that's necessary in order to make positive, meaningful change. And so certainly as a part of that, right, she then also has the opportunity for some increased ownership in her own learning process, but also in thinking about what this means for her as she becomes a professional. So as a physical therapist, which she is going to become after she kills graduate school, because she is going to go, she's going to be a teacher every day when people come into her clinic. And so through this process, right, she also has this opportunity to experience and grow her own skills. The self-awareness piece is huge, and we'll share with you here in just a moment what this looked like in the classroom and what this meant for me as an instructor in terms of thinking about my own self-awareness and what this means for how I interact and engage with students. And then hopefully, right, the research tells us that if we engage students in this type of work, that they feel even more connected to the institution itself, which is our goal, right? We want to increase sense of belonging. There's many ways that we can do it. There's already good work that faculty are doing on campus here at LC to do that very specific thing. And this is just simply another piece to the puzzle, if you will. Christina, do you want to add anything before we jump into what it looked like?
Yeah, so even though this research was mostly in Heather's class, I actually took a lot of what students were doing in that class and incorporated it into other classes that I'm currently taking at LC just to see the reaction from other instructors. Because while it's our research project, it's also a lot better to see across different people and professionals in the work. So I did this in 2 other classes that I have on campus, and it was kind of weird to see how certain instructors responded. You know, if I was sitting there pretending to play on my phone and Facebooking and Snapchatting, or if I was sitting at my computer trying to hide my phone, or if I was just sitting there twirling my hair or trying to snooze, or, pulling my mask down a whole bunch. It was just weird to see how other people responded and tried to engage with me. So I really enjoyed doing this, and I'm excited to go on to next semester with this too.
So to give you an idea of sort of the structure of how this got started and how we work together to facilitate these ongoing conversations and learning experiences this semester. So we first started thinking about what this could look like last spring, early summer, I think. And we exchanged emails, ideas, we met over Zoom. Of course, at that point, we're in the heart of the pandemic. And so there really wasn't much face-to-face opportunities occurring. And so it was occurring virtually, but it was good because we were able to share literature that's been published on this idea. I was able to send her some links to schools that are doing this kind of work and doing it really well. So she had a chance to read and familiarize herself with some of the best practices that these other institutions had identified. And then when we started, when we formalized what this was going to look like, it was really, sort of as we worked our way through the fall semester. And we, continued to check in with one another so that we had a pretty good idea of what this was going to look like. This was sort of an interesting thing. So the first 8 weeks, she actually had another class during my class time. So she couldn't come, which was fine. But what we ended up doing was meeting via Zoom and or face-to-face after our classes concluded. And so we were still engaged in conversation. We were talking about project designs. We were talking about effective assessment strategies. And then especially ways to engage people, because this class was taught in a high flex format. So that in and of itself, as you all know, brings its own unique set of challenges. And so I was really, really reliant on her to help me think about how to engage students on Zoom, how to engage students in the classroom, how to do it simultaneously, and still, do the best we could to deliver the curriculum. Once the first 8 weeks had concluded, her class was done. So she started coming to my class. And she would join both virtually on Zoom, and she was in the classroom face-to-face. And so she was simultaneously observing this learning environment in both settings as it was occurring. And then she was continually engaged with me weekly on thinking about in-class assessment, and student engagement. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what this structure looked like in terms of the frequency with which she and I were communicating and the different ways that she was engaged in the class experience itself. Christina, would you like to add anything before I move us forward?
Sure. So the first 8 weeks, because I did have a different class going on, it did make it kind of difficult, but Heather was kind enough that she actually recorded her classroom. So I was actually able to go in there and see how many students were responding to her questions. Were they doing the hand raising button? Were they even saying anything? Were cameras on? You know, if she was calling out questions, who was responding? And so while I wasn't physically able to be there, I was able to see how they were responding online for the first 8 weeks. It made it a little bit easier while we were moving forward through the first 8 weeks to actually see the kind of progress we were hoping to make in this second 8 weeks.
So the next few slides that we'll share with you are really sort of the heart of this. And the first thing we'd like to share with you is really sort of, you know, what did this have, what sort of impact did this have on the classroom experience itself? And so as I just shared, this was a high flex course. Many of the same things we talked about in the fall have presented themselves this spring. Although students said they wanted a face-to-face experience, we had the Zoom fade quite often, interestingly enough. And so that was sort of a challenge. I really wanted students to come to class more often because we had that space and we had that opportunity. But it is ebb and the flow as the semester progressed. So there are several things that Christina identified and was able to help me think about and try out some new strategies for what that learning experience looked like day to day. One of the things that's been challenging for me personally is that in the face-to-face space pre-COVID, I am a wanderer. I like to not be standing still, but rather to go and wander. I like to be able to move the classroom structure to suit the needs of whatever it is that's happening that day and to try to simulate that sense of community within class. But because we're supposed to stay 6 feet apart and because I'm supposed to stand behind a screen, that made it really, really hard. But that also then changed the ebb and the flow of how information was discussed and how much time we might need to work through a project because the communication had changed so drastically. And so she was really helpful for me, helpful to me in helping me think about, you know, how do I better read the signs when there's black screens here, right? And there's only a couple people here, but we can't simulate the same types of activities in terms of like how close we could be physically or the different types of things we might be able to do in a pre-COVID time. Because it changed time, it changed how we used it, it changed how much we needed. And it changed some of those cues that I had previously relied upon to help me understand when we had used adequate time. I hope that makes sense. As a part of that, then also, she was really helpful in identifying different ways to engage students in participation activities. I tried all kinds of new things this semester that I had never tried before. I felt like every day it was like, well, let's give it a try and see what happens. Maybe this will be the thing. But it was great because I had feedback from the students, but I also had feedback from her, having already gone through the class, reflecting on what it was like to learn before these things had been implemented, and then helping me to also understand what might be influencing student response. So it was just this really unique piece of the communication puzzle that I had been missing that I didn't realize I needed as much as I did. And you know, a variety of different strategies. I don't know, I'll let Christina jump in here. One day she said to me, this is completely different than just a semester ago. And absolutely. You want to share your thoughts on that, Christina?
Sure. So I am actually one of those students who benefits from proximity teaching. So I had, I took Heather's class last year and she was very much walk up to you, put her hand on your shoulder. Oh, okay. What are you confused about? And then she would walk through the steps with me. Now we're at a time where we can't do that. We have to maintain this distance. We have to cover up our facial expressions. And it's really created more of a divide between students and professionals, because now we feel like we're kind of like cattle in a slaughterhouse. You know, we're just another number. We can't have that proximity anymore. And so for students like me who rely on that, it makes learning a lot more difficult. You know, you can hold office hours all you want, but when you can't get as close and like, well, I don't understand this part, and now you can't touch the same sheet of paper as me, it really creates a bigger divide and it makes it harder to connect with you guys. So going through this process has not only helped me be a better learner and a better student, but it's really helped Heather understand the policies that are in place. It's not only difficult for her, it's difficult for us as well. So.
Yeah, and I think it's been funny too, because so she and I'll have these conversations when we meet weekly, right? And she'll say, I could tell that was hard for you. And what's been so challenging, and I think what's really made me grow as an instructor, is that all of those things I've relied upon for so long that worked well for me, that helped me to connect with students, and that I think help students to feel more comfortable and us to establish a relationship, I haven't been able to use. I had no idea how much I relied on people's facial expressions until I couldn't see anything below their eyes. A couple of times I actually had to say to people, I'm actually smiling right now. Like, that's a really great response. Like, that is, I'm smiling, right? You can't see it, but I'm smiling, because I rely on that too as a mechanism to share and to offer feedback. But also the opportunity to stand side by side with somebody, or to sit down and have that shared communal space and understanding as we work through something, just hasn't been able to occur. And so what this has taught me, and what she's been so helpful in helping me think through, are other ways to simulate creating those feelings without using the same activities. And mostly it's been through technology, which, for better or for worse, thank goodness we've had it, because then I don't know what I would have done if we hadn't had that. We relied heavily on interactive technologies in the classroom so I could get real-time feedback because I couldn't see it, or because I couldn't sense it because of the lack of physical proximity. So I started using a service called Mentimeter. It allows you to drop your slides directly into it, so you don't have to alter the content per se, but you can then embed into it real-time feedback activities with polling. Students, you can create word clouds based upon what people share. You can have students drop in comments. And for the most, and they do it on their phones. Or their computers or whatever they have. It's a free service to them. It doesn't charge them anything extra. I pay a small fee yearly, but it made a huge difference just in terms of then using that to spark in-class conversation, whether it was coming from online or it was actually of the students in the classroom. So as we've alluded to, this had actually a stronger impact on curriculum than I thought it would. I'm still teaching the same material-ish, but I had to work, I feel like, much harder to find things that were happening literally that day, because how students are processing information now seems a little bit different. We're used to the immediate gratification of scrolling or flipping or clicking and or whatever, right? And I felt like that then had a direct impact on what I was teaching. So while the content itself was consistent, we're still talking about race and gender and sexuality and religion and all of these really fun topics that get people usually excited. It also had to resonate and connect with what they were seeing, it felt like. So I was literally, one day, a colleague sent me an article. It was just published, and she said, oh, this will be perfect for your media discussion. Well, that's the day I was talking about media. So I was literally changing my slides right before I walked into the classroom, because I was like, oh, this will be the thing that'll catch them, right? This is just data that was just, collected. And sure enough, the responses were very different, because it was also simulating what it was they had been exposed to as they're looking through TikTok or Twitter or whatever, right? And also because of the change in the technology that we were using, it also simulated what that experience looked like in terms of how they're gaining and gathering information, real-time feedback based upon how they respond to a question then changed what they saw and how they started to interact with the material, which by default changed how I taught and changed what I taught and what I shared. One of the things that became really super clear, especially since students were both online and in the classroom, was I had to have much, much less text on my slides. I had to go find images that really were worth 1,000 words because so much screen time. I needed to try to think critically about how to share ideas and topics, knowing that people were spending so much time looking at a screen. And some of them were looking at it on their phones, right? They're taking class on their phone through Zoom, someplace in a quiet hallway. So that was changing how I was sharing information and what I was sharing, actually pretty considerably. Christina, do you want to jump in on this one at all? You were directly involved with helping me to think about how to do this differently.
Sure. So what I explained to Heather was that being at the most visible part of the classroom, you're at the forefront of everything. The distance learning and the gap we have to maintain for social distancing is causing educators to engage less with students, which is allowing us to drown you guys out and more passively. You can't walk around, you can't, before you were up and down the aisles and you could see when people were messing around on their phones and playing on their computers. And now you guys, the policies, you have to stay behind that class. You can't move around, you can't go anywhere. And so it's created almost like this more guilt-stricken kind of student. Okay, I get to sit here and play around and, oh, I'm paying attention right now, but just give me 5 minutes on, Snapchat and I'll come back to you type of thing. And when I explained that a little bit more to her, that it's easier to drown you out because we have to do this, it had more of an impact on her because I have that different perspective. So I explained, she was saying she had to cut out more text out of her presentations. And what I think some instructors can forget is that every class we have, everybody does PowerPoint presentations. It's always the presentation. And while that's great to give us information, if you're not using other visuals or pictures or anything like that, it's so much easier to drown out because a lot of instructors tend to just read directly off of the screen instead of explaining what they're trying to get us to learn and understand. So I thought Mentimeter was really great for a couple of different reasons. You enter this little code, it's kind of like Kahoot, and you enter this code into your phone or computer, and it's a great way to say what you're thinking anonymously. She would have the word clouds and she would ask about athletes that have made an impact in your life. And so, this, as more people enter the same name, it becomes bigger and bigger on the screen, which is great because then she saw who was more important to the majority of the classroom. There were some names that some people hadn't heard of, and she was like, who's this guy? And then somebody, it engaged more conversation through that. Another part of Mentimeter is that it allowed her to do polls. So you could have a yes, no answer or an I don't know. And so it allowed you to speak without knowing who was speaking. And it's great for students who, me sometimes, don't like to just say everything out loud because a lot of times we feel stupid because we don't exactly know the material. I myself am not a sports kind of person. I never grew up playing sports. I did martial arts. But for the longest time until I took her class, I had no idea who Usain Bolt was. And I still don't know a lot of these athletes. But it's such a prevalent part of our culture right now that not knowing that information kind of makes me feel like the black sheep. And so Mentimeter allowing you to input this information anonymously helped kind of gap and that barrier that we were hitting.
So as we talked about this, she was unbelievably helpful in thinking and helping me think differently about assessment. Again, I was so used to relying on these skills and strategies that I've been using for so long now that worked. They were great, but the shift in culture, the shift in change in what this looks like as teachers meant that those things that I just couldn't rely on them anymore because I didn't have access to them. And so the opportunity to think differently about how we seek feedback and how I use that feedback then to channel how I can try to improve that learning experience was huge. So, when I could see that students were struggling, or I started doing things like at the conclusion of every chapter, I was just trying to think of other ways to keep students engaged with the material. And so I started posting, self-checks and, go do this and go here to find that. You can take it over and over again. I don't know who's taking it. I don't know your score. It doesn't matter to me. This is a tool for you. So I was, as the semester progressed, continuing to build a library that allowed students who perhaps were already feeling really confident with the material, other resources that they could read and take it further. But also for students who were less comfortable with the material, those resources were there to help them increase their comfortability, but also their sense of understanding, which then theoretically then encourage more engagement. And I think that's been helpful, but that's also changed what that learning space looks like on a day-to-day basis. Something else she's also been really helpful for me is helping me think about how I redesign rubrics based upon this changing way that we're processing information. One of the things that's been particularly challenging for me is I feel like I'm repeating myself like 6 or 7 times, like literally saying the same thing. It's on the screen, it's in an email, it's on Canvas, and I'm saying it over and over, and I keep getting the same questions. And I said to her, I don't know how else to say it. I don't know what to do. Like, I really am stuck here. And she helped me think differently about how it is I share expectations, the frequency or the timing by which I share expectations, and then how that information is presented to students to try to help minimize or cut down on any potential confusion. Because I feel like, and I don't know if you all feel this way as well, but there seems to be more confusion, not less, despite greater attempts to clarify or to simplify. So we worked a lot on my rubrics. I love a good rubric, but it turns out they needed some work. So that was pretty helpful as well. So we wanted to sort of summarize for you some suggestions that we have, both from her perspective as a student and my perspective as a faculty member. But if you're thinking about perhaps entering into a partnership like this with a student, here are some things to consider as you're contemplating whether something like this might be a good fit for you, but also as you're thinking about ways and strategies perhaps to meet student need in this changing environment in which we're teaching. So Christina, would you like to share first?
Sure, I can do that. So some of the ideas I had is don't be afraid to call on students by name, mostly because we know half of them are sitting there playing on their phones, not paying attention to what they're trying to be taught. And it's kind of the way I see it from my perspective, because I did do this in other classes, it's kind of writing that mutual respect line. Well, you're not going to call on me, so I'm just going to do what I want this hour and 15 minutes. And so when you notice that and you call them out, you're pretty much telling them they need to back away from that line, that you have standards in your classroom and they need to respect those standards. Another way was trying interactive programs to increase engagement. This was Mentimeter, this was creating a Kahoot, this was submitting questions that can be incorporated into the test. And that came from sometimes when you have a study guide over a test, it's really confusing as a student when the study guide is not what you have on your test. Not everyone's like that. There are some instructors who do incorporate everything, but sometimes we are confused as students on what you want us to learn. What is the most important value that you want to give to us in these courses? And that's usually what I, as a student, would like to see on a study guide. So if you feel that you have these 10 points you really want us to get across, and I know sometimes you guys have certain criteria and learning objectives that you have to get to us, but finding the most valuable part in those objectives that you really want us to take hold of and take with us when we leave LCSC. That's what I, as a student, would really like to see, because it shows us where your values lie in the courses and information that you're teaching. Another one was balancing papers and projects, encouraging engagement with material in different ways. So almost every course I've taken, we have to write a paper or we have to do a presentation. I helped Heather create this project of, she could tell you a little bit more about it because it was kind of her baby. You had to find a new sort of interactive way to engage students, and it had to have pictures and it had to have historical value to it. But it was just a little bit different than just an APA paper or a PowerPoint presentation. The other biggest thing was engaging with students you have to ask them why. You have to know, why are they here? For me, I took Heather's class. It was one of the choices I had as a elective course, but I was really kind of curious about all the different theories that were presented. Even though I don't understand them very well, she was able to present them in a way that now I can bring that forward in my own education moving forward. The why is going to tell you whether or not those students are willing to engage. If they're just taking your course to fill an elective, they're less likely to engage with you because they're just trying to get those extra credits. If it's somebody who has to take it because it's a requirement, they're more than likely going to pay attention because they can't graduate and move forward without your course. So it's really just trying to figure out why they're there, why they want to be there, and why they want to be involved.
Thanks. So the that question, ask their why, it seems so simple, but I really hadn't thought about it like that before until one day she and I were sitting in my office and I was like, man, why don't they get excited about this more? Like, I am so pumped to see what this project comes out as. And she just sat back in her chair and she goes, do you even know why they're here? And I thought, don't know if I can answer that question with any fidelity. Like, I'm actually not sure. Is this a major requirement? Are they there to fill it? I don't know. I haven't asked. And then I thought, man, I can't believe I haven't asked. And that was a light bulb moment for me. I've been doing this a long time, but I had a lot of light bulb moments this semester, largely because she would just ask me, like, well, did you think about that? I guess I didn't, but maybe I should have. And I mean, that really helped me to sort of to recenter and refocus in this time that where things feel squishy, right? I mean, it's hard, the ground keeps moving. And so she really helped me though. She always asked questions that helped or encouraged me to stop and consider and rethink some things. And I was so grateful for that. So if you're thinking about doing something like this, it's not for everybody. I loved it. We're going to do it again in the fall. I'm super excited about that because the classroom environment's going to shift again, right? So, well, fingers crossed that we won't have to do it in the high flex, but that they can all be there together in the same space. But now that we've gone through this and now that she's helped me to rethink some things, I mean, I firmly believe that what that class looks like now when we're back in the classroom all together won't look like it did pre-COVID. And it won't look like it did in the middle of COVID, right? It's going to evolve and change, which we would expect. But I've learned a lot along the way, especially as she's helped me to see things through a different perspective that I think are going to make that environment better. I hope they're going to make that environment better. I know they're certainly challenging me and pushing me as an instructor. So, so much about this is student feedback. And it's getting to a place where you're ready to receive it, even if it's not quite what you thought you were going to get, or if it really it's made me stop and pause. It's made me stop and think. But I needed it, and I'm so grateful for her willingness to be able to feel comfortable enough to provide it, because she's been honest, I think, and that honesty was really, really valued. So, creating these different ways and avenues for students to engage purposefully and meaningfully in this shared process of learning is essential to this. I think we all want that. I think the challenge is, how do we create it when so much of the culture in which we teach is built upon a hierarchy? So thinking about shifting that in a way, I think becomes, sort of essential to this kind of work. And always, sort of going with it on the day of, right? So I had these strategies in my back pocket I used for so long, and they just simply weren't effective because they couldn't be used. So having to adjust and adapt along the way was challenging, but I think it's making me a better teacher. It's certainly making me more self-aware, and it's certainly making me think differently about what that learning space looks like. Because we want this to be fun for us, but also for them, but it's not fun for anybody if we can't figure out how to bridge some of these divides. But I needed a fresh set of eyes, and I needed a different perspective to help me get there. So, if this is of interest to you, I think invite somebody, pick a student who's taken your class before. So they're familiar with the content, they're familiar with you, they're familiar with what your classroom looks like and feels like, and invite them to join you in this process. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with how much you learn and how useful and beneficial it can be to you as an instructor. But also helps to, again, sort of solidify some of these relationships that we have with our students. We are literally welcoming them into helping us think differently about the work that we do. And that's meaningful for students too, I think, as Christina has expressed, because she's actively engaged in this process herself. But this allows her to share her perspectives in different ways that she sees real-time changes, right, that are positively influencing what that learning space looks like. I mean, how many times have we heard students say things like, I know I did as a chair all the time, well, are you going to read my SEs? Like, are you going to do something? Like, what happens with these, right? Students are constantly sort of questioning and wondering, like, if I give you feedback, will you use it? Well, in this relationship, this faculty student sort of pedagogical partner relationship, the whole idea is to take that feedback and use it then meaningfully, real time. And the buy-in and the connection that we get from students through that purposeful engagement is pretty powerful. And they see it, right? They see it being used, which I think is exactly what they're hoping for, that their voices matter too, and that they're a part of shifting the culture and making that learning environment as positive as it can be. So we're going to do this again in the fall because it was super awesome and I'm really excited about it. If you're interested in the work of schools that are already doing this, these are sort of the two schools, I think, arguably, from a national perspective, that are doing this really, really well. Bryn Mawr and Elon. Both institutions have offices specifically set aside for these partnerships. Students have to, at these institutions, they apply and they go through the process to make sure that they're fully committed. They have faculty identify who are interested in doing this kind of work, that they're interested, and they sort of go through an application process so we can make sure that we pair people who have similar personality styles, who probably will communicate well with one another. And they always try to pair people, right, where these relationships already have some foundation or something that's existing to try to make them be successful. Now, what these folks do, what I can't do, is they pay students to do this. They pay them like a work study, or they pay them like a work scholar. And I mean, that just got me thinking, like, oh my gosh, like if people love this, like we could totally embed this into, like, sort of some of the other cool things that we're doing on campus to give students these really great experiences. But both of these institutions, because they have centers devoted to this work, have a web presence that has best practices, that has resources that we as faculty can use and utilize. They have annual conferences where they bring students and faculty together to share their experiences and their work. I mean, it's really embedded into the foundation of how they approach instruction at these institutions. I'm a fan. I wasn't sure when we went into it what the end result would be, but I know undoubtedly that it has helped me to become a better teacher. And I also know that that would have been possible unless I had a student like Christina, who is willing to give up her time and effort and energy to help me in that process. I think we have other students on this campus who would probably be very excited to engage in this kind of work too. But it's different. It's probably not for everybody, but I loved it. And I'm really excited to see, now that we've established this foundation together, what it can look like in the fall as things change again. Because I think we're just going to continue to grow and improve in the process. Christina, would you like to add anything else?
So it's definitely not for the faint of heart. There were some times where I had to be brutally honest with Heather. There was one time I literally told her, Heather, you're just being too nice. And so knowing that you are going to have to hear some good and bad, but overall it's going to make you hope it's going to make you a better professional educator, I think is really what we were trying to gain, was how much engagement are we doing? Are we getting through to them? And I saw some of the comments about, I really like the comment about learning the evolution of their why, beginning, middle, and end. I honestly didn't think about that. So thank you for putting that in the chat, Erin. I would have to say my why's changed. My why changed from when I took her class a year ago. It changed from the beginning to the end. And now through her course, I am better able to see through another pair of glasses exactly how that's changing our culture. So that's not something I thought about. And I really want to kind of put that into practice this next semester. So thank you for putting that in the chat.
So I don't know if y'all want to, I don't know how to, we have 15 minutes. Would you like to chat, share? I mean, I'm assuming based upon who's in this virtual space together that y'all have tried some of these things before in whole or in part. And so I'd love to just have this be a conversation amongst colleagues. Go ahead, Marlo.
Well, I just had a question about the way you implemented this. Christina, did the other students in the class understand what your role was? And did you get any feedback from them about this?
So no one actually knew what I was there for. They all just thought I was another student. So it was kind of like a blind study. I was afraid that if they knew why I was there, then they would all start kind of like behaving like they're supposed to in class. And so I did this I have test and measurements with Clay Robinson, Dr. Clay Robinson. He had no idea that I was like playing on my phone, doing my own research in his classes. So I was kind of seeing his reaction to see how it was different from Heather. So nobody besides me and Heather and my husband, obviously, knew what I was doing in these classroom settings. They all thought that I was an online student that just started showing up. And I would even answer questions that she would ask. I would have my own input. So it felt more like I was there as a student, but also because I had things to say. And just from last year, her material has been updated so much that even though I got to research, I was learning again. So it wasn't like a repeat of the same stuff. It was just more learning, and it was a really great time.
Thanks.
And there was no, I mean, so we weren't collecting data on individual students. It was really observational based, right? So she would say, hey, why don't you try out this technique and see if it changes engagement? And so I try it out. And then she was sitting there like keeping like, well, that didn't work. Or, oh, this student who hasn't said anything in like 3 days, like was totally engaged, right? And so that was the sort of feedback, right? And the sort of the information. It would be very similar, I think, to if you had another faculty member come in and observe your class, although then it's like totally obvious that somebody's there for something official. But it's the same idea. I mean, that's the kind of feedback she was providing. It wasn't specific to individual people other than like, well, that guy had said something and he hasn't really contributed before, but let's watch again next time and see if that's the thing that seems to be pulling him in, right? And so, there were times where, we were just looking at the layout of the class, right? And so where do most of the comments seem to be coming from? And so she was keeping track of things like that, right? Or she was watching me to make sure I was watching to see if students unmuted themselves if they wanted to join in, so I didn't miss them. And one day she said, I don't think you were paying close enough attention. And then it was like, oh gosh, maybe I wasn't, like, okay, I need to go back and refocus, right? And so it was that kind of stuff, that was sort of superficial in its nature, but actually super meaningful because it was giving immediate feedback on what we ended up focusing on primarily, which was engagement.
I love how the fast. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say I really want to do this. It sounds totally for me. I kind of had already planned for the fall to do not like this study. Like, I think this is even better than what I was thinking of doing. But same thing. I've been teaching my ID 300 class, which just brings in people from all disciplines, and it's a topic that I'm really passionate about. So it's gender and culture. And I've never taught hybrid before. This is the first semester I've ever taught in a hybrid format. So we have one day in the classroom and the rest online. And I'm teaching an intro class that way and an upper division seminar style class that way. And I can say both are failing. Like, I just don't, and for a number of reasons, but like my connection with the students is just, I have all my tricks have not worked. Like I just, everything that I have known how to do, I just feel like in so many ways, asked for feedback, just designated a whole day. Like, I just want to hear from you. Like, how do you feel? Like, how, anonymous survey. I mean, I've really tried to just reshape the mode. Well, I'm teaching in hybrid format again in the fall, and I can tell you, I'm just like kind of dreading it a bit, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to shift like enough I just know that I want more connection and just more excitement. And again, I'm working in a space where I have to allow phones and people to zoom in and these things where I've just never had to do that. And so how do I make everyone feel included? And like you, I walk around and I touch people, and I'm vaccinated, and I'll be probably still wearing my mask in the fall. And hopefully there will be some more touching, because I'm a touchy, interactive, sit down with them, all those things you said. Yes, that I'm like, oh, I hate this. I can't see their faces, everything. So I'll stop talking. But my idea was, I was going to invite a student who's taken that class before, that you actually know. So Rebecca took it with me last time I taught it. And, but I thought I would work with her, like kind of like a TA, like have her take notes and be in the classroom and observe, like, are there things that I could do, but also then hold study groups, right? Like that I just provide a set of points. They're optional, but enough points that it feels exciting that they would go and engage in this space, like on our off day, but also hoping that they will find her as a mentor, mediator, share with her, and that we would meet. And it would be a way for me to get informal but formal feedback that maybe I wouldn't hear or see and be able to adjust. So I guess was my idea of trying to connect and maybe have her see what's happening in the hybrid, because she took it, but not in a hybrid format, but maybe she can give me some insights. But I guess that's what I was thinking of doing in the fall, to try to do better and to connect. But yeah, that's my piece. Sorry, I talked longer than I thought I should.
You're good. That's
No,
awesome.
you're absolutely fine.
One of the things that Christina and I have talked about trying next fall is actually giving her more of that formal role, or that formal space where she then can get feedback in other ways. So just as you've described, right, setting up these or structuring opportunities for her to sort of do like quasi interviews, really, this sort of like low stakes, but hey, what do you think about this? Or did you like this? Or did you like that? So then she also gets their perspectives directly, not just her observations of their behaviors. And so I think that's something we're going to try as well. We were waiting on that just because of the nature of how the class is being conducted right now. It's sort of weird. Sometimes students don't come at all. They do it all online. Sometimes they come both days, and then next week they come one day. That's not even their assigned day. I mean, we're all over the place. And so it makes it hard, I think, or it's made it hard to be able to schedule or structure that. But hopefully next fall, we'll be able to get a better handle on that. And then she'll really have more of then they're going to know who she is. But she's also going to have different interactions in that space too. I don't know if that makes sense. So I think we're going to try to do something similar to what you've just described.
I'm anxious to hear part 2 then of this presentation, so that we hear the difference between, what the interactions look like and how much you gain from that, versus Christina kind of being that secret shopper in the classroom.
Yeah, it's definitely been a little different. Something I did notice was, if you don't have participation points or attendance points, they're less likely to show up. So something that we had talked about after the first 8 weeks was, I was like, do they have assigned days? And she goes, yeah, but they don't always show up. So the first couple of weeks, there were only like 4 or 5 students in the class. And then I came the following week, which is, of course, a study guide day right before the test, and almost the whole class was full. So it definitely makes a difference. But even for me as a student, if there's participation points, you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to show up, because I'm one of those students where I like all A's. I don't like C is not passing for me. So we've talked about maybe changing up her rubric for points for next semester, and possibly incorporating a little bit more into that. She did something really cool this time that showed who was paying attention on Zoom is at the end of the video recording, the last couple of minutes of class, she would say, okay, for participation points today, I need you to fill out this question, send me your answer. So if you're not behind that black screen, you don't get those points for that day because you don't know, because that window closes 15 minutes after class. So if you haven't submitted an answer, you know, and they're all opinion based, so it's not a right or wrong answer, which I thought was really great and hadn't heard of before. So it's definitely, I feel like you get more engagement if there's more points put into that attendance and participation point, and it kind of helps people come out of their shell a little bit more.
So I have a question in regards to participation points. What's the right percentage of a class to have tied to participation points? Because you mentioned that it's got to be worthwhile. And some students depend on these to help them, you know, those with test anxiety and stuff. What's the right percentage, do you guys think? Or what have you guys found? And that, I guess, is for anybody, right? All right.
I did 15%.
15.
So for testing purposes, that's a really great question. I actually work with accessibility services. So I work with Autumn Green. From my time in the military, I have severe PTSD. I stand and roam around the room, and that's going to look really awkward with 28 other students in the classroom. So if they have that, you can definitely tell them to reach out to accessibility services. Autumn is amazing. She's helped me. They have private rooms, they have semi-private rooms. So if it's for testing purposes, they have a resource that they can utilize that still proctors their exam, they still get watched, but they can do what they need to. To be honest, sometimes I even cry in my test. There was a test I had with Clay at the beginning of the semester, and I don't do statistics well. I haven't taken that since nursing school in like 2014. So to try and take that again, I was literally in tears. And so he's like, I'll put you over in the lab and just let you do your thing. And I cried and I walked around that bar, I don't know how many times in that room. But there are resources for those who have, you know, the testing portion anxiety that they can reach out to and still get those participation points that they need. For me, it's nice to know that it's enough, and I don't see your guys' side of it. But for me, it's nice to know that it's enough to make a grade difference. So if it's 10%, that's good enough for me, because that can literally be the difference between my A to a B because I didn't show up. So it just depends on how many points you use to structure your class. I know some classes are thousands of points because of all the different stuff they have. Some are only 400 to 600. And so that can be kind of terrifying when you have the least amount of points, and they put so much emphasis on the testing as well as participation. And sometimes things just come up. So I would have to agree with you about 15% sounds great. For me, it's at least 10% because that makes a great difference in my book. Thanks for your question.
One of the things we started doing, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we have time for one more question. It's almost one. But Heather, you're about to say something, so I don't want to cut you off.
Sorry, I'll say it super fast. One of the things we started doing with participation points, especially during this time period, is giving some freebies. So I tell them we do them X number of days. I don't know what day they're going to be on, but X number of days, but you get 2 freebies. So if you're not there, you don't show up, you don't turn them in, don't tell me, I don't need to know. I don't need to know an excuse or reason. You just decided you didn't want to get out of bed. That's cool. I'm good. But it won't count against you. So, and that seems to have created or decreased some anxiety too about how much or how frequently. It just creates a little buffer for students, which has seemed to really help given all of the things going on.
I was just going to say the same, like the freebies, or just being very clear in terms of how you're defining participation. I said, we're going to have participation points, and I wanted to leave it open because I just really wanted to use them more as a reward system. You're here, we had a great conversation. Awesome, you get participation. But that actually made students really nervous. They really wanted to know there's this many opportunities, and this exactly how I was going to be measuring it. So one thing I've learned about participation points is it can't have no boundaries. Like it really, for it to be reassuring and to be supportive, I really had to define exactly how I was going to give out those participation points, for if that's helpful to anyone. That's something I've learned about participation points. Like I saw them as lovely and free, and other people were like, no, I need to know exactly how I earn these, right? And I was like, I can appreciate that for sure.
All right, it is our 1 o'clock time. I have to run back to lab, and I know other folks have things that they need to go off to, and it feels like there's more here to talk about. And I think part of the reason for that is that this connects so meaningfully to what our campus climate looks like and environment looks like, but also there's sort of this personal meaning piece that has to do with acknowledging that this is a way to increase my own self-awareness about teaching in ways that are really useful and in ways I've never really thought about before. So thank you for bringing these to the table. It sounds like we get to do this again in the semester, Marlo. And so write it down. We'll write it down that you're going to have to come back and talk some more. And I want to just thank everybody for coming today. It's just been really a really kind of special way to celebrate that relationship between a student and faculty member. So thank you for being here. All right. Does anybody have like a last word before we
come to
bye?
idea? Come share more ideas in the garden on Tuesday. It's the garden.
Idea.
It's beautiful. Just come hang out with us. You can share any ideas, but this idea is lovely. So we can continue this conversation. We would love to have you. Christina, you're welcome too. You have lots of good ideas.
Thank you.
You can be an honorary idea ambassador. We I just overspoke maybe, but I would love, we're going to be in the garden. We can Zoom you into, so Rachel, Marlo, and I will for sure be there, but we would really love to have you. And we thought being outside and connecting with nature might be a nice way to kind of bring this all together. But if you can't do that, just Zoom in. We'll have a little laptop there, right? We're going to all-inclusive technology in the garden, which I think is like,
we're all over mixed modalities.
Sure, just send me the information to my email.
Yeah, we're learning, we're listening, but we would love to have all of you. So Tuesday, I'm inviting, and now I don't know, three. I'm like, I don't have it right here in front of me. Okay.
And where's the garden at again?
Behind the parking lot next to the president's house.
Okay.
I'll walk over with you.
Okay.
Oh, and that's why I've been turning off my phone. I have 3 dogs. They were like, nice to see all your faces.
It's so good to see you all. Have a
Thanks,
great
everybody.
Thank you. Bye.